Hi, my name is Sha Xin Wei, and I'll be an instructor for the New Center's course on Topological and Metabolic Approaches to Ontogenesis. So what does that mean? Basically, one way to think about how the world is made is to think in terms of objects, of things. But this course takes a different approach equally as ancient, which is taking the point of view of process, of how things change, not what things are, but how things transform. So, and to get there along the way, I'm going to take a course through thinking about the stuff of which things are made, and then think in terms of how stuff transforms. Okay, so there'll be 4 sessions. In the first session, I'll introduce some topics from topology, which have recently been entering into philosophical conversations about culture and society. And I'll furnish, hopefully, the seminar with some basic concepts like concepts of topological dynamics, like process and transformation of field and continuity. So that's the first session. There'll be some readings associated with that. In the second session, I'll be turning to looking at models for transformation process from life, from biology, and from living systems, to have an alternative to the usual sources of these kinds of notions coming more from physics and from computer science. Okay, so that's why we'll be looking at readings readings about vegetable biology, about the life of plants, with the works of Immanuel Kocha and of a biologist, Mauseth. But then we'll also be looking at writings from theoretical biologists that have been transforming recently the way people think about evolution, about what characterizes life, looking at works by people such as Giuseppe Longo and Mel Monteville. In addition to that, we'll be looking at some work by the well-known biologist and theoretical biologist Stuart Kauffman. So that's the second session. And in the third session, we'll be turning squarely to the question of ontogenesis and individuation. So how the world develops, how the world evolves, how individuals relate to their milieu. So for there we'll start as an appetizer by looking at an architect, Christopher Alexander, and how he thinks about the process of designing the built environment. And turned out later in his career that he was also drawing from ideas from philosophy, for example, by the works of Alfred North Whitehead, Heraclitus, and other process thinkers. So with that as the beginning, we'll then turn to the work of Gilbert Simondon, so one of the most important philosophers of technology, whose work has been recently translated into English. So for that, we'll take a little bit of a sampling because there's so much work there. So we'll be looking at some works by Simondon, talking about individuation. And then we'll round out that third session with some readings on very recent work on work by theorists in response to a question set up by Stuart Kauffman. In fact, a challenge by Stuart Kauffman, saying that perhaps there is no entailing law, there's no rule, there's no formula by which we can actually predict the evolution of any kind of biological or living system, including societies. So there are some mathematicians, namely Alessandro Starti and Giovanna Citti, who have been working on what they call differential heterogenesis, inspired by works of Deleuze. So we'll take a look at what they've been saying, seeing if that's somehow maybe a partial answer or a continuation of the adventure of this question of ontogenesis and individuation. For the last session, the fourth session, I've titled it Making Sense in Common, inspired by a book recently translated into English by Isabel Stengers. And for that, we'll start with some work by a young philosopher, Noah Brinder, who's been writing about, inspired by Merleau-Ponty and looking at cognitive science, coming up with an account which I think is very rich, an account of the notion of sense-making, but from the point of view of symmetry breaking. So then, in addition to that, we can look at some classic works, some great works, for example, from Gilles Deleuze's Logic of Sense, trying to understand a little bit more about what sense-making means in various contexts, in this case, in the context of Deleuze. And furnished with these different approaches to sense and sense-making, I'd like to close the seminar by turning squarely to Isabel Stenger's work, Making Sense in Common, which draws upon the work of process philosophers such as Alfred North Whitehead, but really is addressing to the question of what is to be done today. So thank you very much. I hope you'll come to my seminar and we'll enjoy some conversations together.